Good night, everybody. Welcome tonight to the last webinar of the season for the topic of human trafficking. Tonight, we welcome again Lisa Lundgren. Lisa is the Immigration and Anti-Trafficking Coordinator for the USCCB. And we're going to start tonight with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. And without further ado, I'm going to welcome Lisa.
Thank you so much, Maria. It's a great pleasure to be with all of you today, and I'm very thankful to the Office of Human Life and Dignity of the Archdiocese of San Francisco for inviting me to be with you this evening. Again, I'm the National Education and Outreach Coordinator at USCCB for Anti-Trafficking and Immigration. And let me put on my slides for you, just one moment. There we go. So I hope we'll have an enjoyable evening together. First, we'll just look very briefly and we'll review the church's historic role in repudiating and combating this crime of human trafficking. Just get my slides to move, just one moment. There we go. And then we'll spend the majority of our time together discussing what parishes and local community members can do to combat human trafficking. You know, there's much concern for victims and survivors of human trafficking among faith-based people and particularly Catholics. But given the complexity of the issue and due to its criminal underpinnings, and the fact that it's a hidden crime, we often talk about it being hidden in plain sight. It can really be easy for parishioners and community members to become discouraged because it seems like an unsurmountable problem or crime. But there really are ways that we can all become involved and make a difference. And these are ways that are safe and appropriate for all of us. So I'm looking forward to providing you some examples from parishes around the country that are involved in one of our programs called Become a Shepherd. So first, let's just delve a little bit into our church's commitment to combating trafficking so we can all feel very proud. The church's repudiation of trafficking actually is rooted in the catechism. Our catechism actually forbids acts leading to the enslavement of human beings. And this is when human beings are bought, sold, and exchanged like merchandise. And this repudiation is reaffirmed and reiterated in Vatican II. And as we all know, that was the Assembly of Bishops in the 1960s that met together to assess the role of our church in the modern world. And so from Gaudium et Spes, which is one of 4 documents that came out of that Vatican II, we hear that sex and labor trafficking, where people are treated as mere tools for profit rather than free persons, are infamies, poison society, and are supreme dishonor to our Creator. Since the 1960s, our church continues to prioritize the issue, specifically with our last 3 papal leaders, Pope John Paul II, Pope Benedict XVI, and Pope Francis. Each of them has publicly decried trafficking in persons, they've called for its eradication, and they've called for the protection of survivors. But I just want to spend a moment on Pope Francis because he has a personal and a very deep commitment to this issue. And that's really elevated human trafficking and our need to eradicate it and protect survivors within our church. And as many of you probably know, Pope Francis always refers to trafficking as a scourge against humanity. And as you were there last week with me, he also speaks of it being an open wound on contemporary society. Most notably, he's spoken with particular urgency about our responsibility as Catholics and people of goodwill to not look the other way. And so he's always urging our church to unite and fight this crime together. And so I just wanted to read you a quote which he said at a general audience in the Vatican, because I really think it's something that can move us and continue motivating us. But he says, "I invite everyone, citizens and institutions, to join forces to prevent the slave trade and to guarantee protection and assistance for survivors." And so when you come to events like these, where you want to learn more about human trafficking and find out what's possible to do and how we can work in parishes, and this is after long days at work or with your children or millions of responsibilities that you have, you should really feel good because you are accepting this invitation that Pope Francis has given us. So our church frequently mentions the evils of both sex trafficking and labor trafficking. And unfortunately, we see both in the United States. When it comes to labor trafficking, most of the victims are immigrants or foreign nationals. And in terms of sex trafficking, the majority of victims are US citizens. I just wanted to let you know that there's the nonprofit organization that runs the human trafficking hotline, Polaris. They actually analyzed more than 32,000 cases of human trafficking. And with that information, they developed a classification system and they identified 25 types of human trafficking in our country, 25 types. And each of these types has its own business model, its own trafficker profile, its own recruitment strategies, victim profiles, and also their own methods of control that facilitate human trafficking. And as you can see, the industries identified either fall into situations where victims are compelled to perform commercial sex acts, like you see all the industries on the left, and then there's the ones where individuals are forced to provide labor against their will. And just as a quick reminder, it's always important to remind yourself that being compelled to perform a commercial sex act or some type of labor, it does not always happen by force. Remember that traffickers often maliciously use fraud and coercion, which always involves tricks, deceit, and lies. So again, I know we looked at all these industries, 25, where trafficking rears its ugly head in the United States. And so again, it can become overwhelming, and this might be what your parishioners feel. So it's important to remind parishioners that the fact that the Pope is urging us to become involved and not look the other way really illustrates his confidence in us that we can have an impact. And like I said before, the good news is that there is quite a lot we can do within our parishes and communities. At USCCB, it's been very satisfactory working there because we've witnessed a lot of eagerness among parishioners to become involved. And how do we know this? It's because of this Become a Shepherd program that we have. We have available a toolkit, a leader's guide, a presentation with accompanying notes, and a series of engagement activities that can really help lay leaders and religious leaders alike to gain the skills and the knowledge they need to address human trafficking from a Catholic perspective. So I just wanted to show you some of the requests that we received over the last 4 to 6 months all over the country. The requests do come from dioceses, religious orders, parishes, universities, and even individual churchgoers who just want to know more about trafficking and learn about ways that they can make a difference. I also wanted you to see some of the information that we receive when we respond to the requests. We always ask why they're asking for the tools. And the first for 2 up above just talk about parishioners that want to inform themselves and their community. While the 2 on the bottom, they actually mention their professions. And the one on the bottom says, I'm a parishioner and a doctor. I work at a homeless clinic and I have become aware of trafficking in our state. And I just want to know what I can do to help end this atrocity. So we understand that some of you might be receiving these same requests from parishioners on how to become involved, or maybe you as an individual want to become involved, or maybe you want to, go to your church leadership and suggest that they become involved in anti-trafficking activities. And our best practices show that it's really a 3-pronged approach. We talk about education, formal and informal, engagement, and sustainability. So now I'll provide you with some of those innovative and replicable techniques. And as I said, they'll be based on best practices that we've acquired through the years in our Shepherd program. And it'll be through a successful example that we've seen throughout the country. So let's start with education. Holding awareness raising events to introduce community members or parishioners is an excellent way to begin. Our Shepherd program, again, has a nice general PowerPoint presentation, Human Trafficking 101, and accompanied notes. But it's also important that when you do a general human trafficking awareness program, we really invite you to emphasize what's happening on the local level so parishioners can understand that this is not just a faraway global problem, it's not just a national problem, but it's happening at our local communities, in urban centers, in rural communities, and the suburbs. So again, in addition to becoming familiar with our human trafficking resources or human trafficking resources of other organizations, you really want to research how this crime is manifesting itself in your own community. You could start by using data, for example, from the National Human Trafficking Hotline. They have an estimated volume of trafficking cases per state that can get you started. You can research and find out about the victim service providers in your city or your locale. Some of them might be faith-based, like a Catholic Charities or a Bethany Christian Center. You can call them and they might be able to provide you, it probably will be general, but they can give you an overall feeling of the type of victims they're seeing, what type of trafficking they've had to endure, and what types of services they provide. And finally, you can go to your state's websites, like the Attorney General websites. You can even go to the Office of Human Life and Dignity, which has a lot of great information. Actually, before this talk, I wanted to learn a little bit more about trafficking in California. And right from that site, I found out that in the world's 5th biggest economy, California is considered one of the top states for human trafficking. And that Bay Area, unfortunately, is a national hotspot. So I really recommend your own archdiocese site. So we talked about formal education, getting that human trafficking 101 out there through presentations, whether it's at your parish hall, a classroom, or now on Zoom because of COVID. But then we also really like to emphasize a way to build onto this, and we call that informal education. And that's just referring to what takes place outside of the classroom setting. It's reinforcing that message that's been learned. I call it maybe bridging the gap between academia and real life. And so you can think about it as continued awareness raising through messaging in various creative formats that can happen throughout the year and which really engages your public. So we talk about this being all year round if possible. We know from marketing research that messages are much more effective the more they're repeated. I'm sure we all remember the infamous advertising campaign that's one of the most recognizable in our country called Got Milk. If you can believe it, that started in 1993 and it went on for 21 years. Obviously, we're not trying to sell anything here. I'm just trying to make a point that awareness shouldn't stop, if possible, at the first training or the first event. And I think it's because we all have really busy lives with competing priorities. So it's understandable that we get distracted and we forget about things that are really important to us. So that's why parishes and dioceses can really help parishioners keep this issue close to their heart and as part of their faith journey by making it a thematic priority at different times during the year. And again, like I said, there's lots of room for creativity. The Shepherd program made a calendar that highlights days in the year where the survivors are remembered, and also where we're invited to remember our commitment to fighting trafficking. The most common one is the month of January, which is National Slavery and Human Trafficking Prevention Month. I know it was highlighted all month long by the Office of Human Life and Dignity at the Archdiocese. That was actually began in 2010. It was proclaimed by President Obama, and it's continued every year since, no matter who the president has been or what political party has been in power. Another example is the second week of April, which is the National Crime Victims' Rights Week. And that's dedicated to learning about victimization, how victims of crime are not only affected, but it's also like it has a reverberating effect, and their friends and their families and their communities are also impacted. And what is one of the most heinous and horrible crimes we have? Human trafficking. So it fits in perfectly that week. Again, on May 22nd, we actually have the Day of Prayer and Remembrance for Mariners and People of the Sea. And you're probably thinking, what does this have to do with human trafficking? Well, it turns out that the fishers who catch our fish are are at very high risk of being exploited and even enslaved on vessels where they spend months on end in international waters without being able to escape. So that's important a day to remember as well. And again, there doesn't have to be a special holiday or day of remembrance. It can happen all year long, whatever fits your parish or your diocese or your community. So now I actually want to introduce you to some of the activities that parishes have done around the country. And I wanted to start with California, Southern California, but California at in Long Beach at St. Joseph Church. They began their ministry with a simple event in the parish hall, and they invited the Los Angeles County Sheriff, who at the time was Jim McDonnell, as their keynote speaker. And he really focused on how trafficking at the time was manifesting itself in the Long Beach area. And then the parish used informal education, like I was speaking about, to continue building awareness among the parishioners. They asked the pastor if they could have a corner in the weekly bulletin to post human trafficking facts that had a local focus, and also to advertise events that were coming up about human trafficking. They actually developed a logo so their ministry could be identified. It's called Esther Ministry. They made a bookmark, and one side of the bookmark had a prayer for survivors of human trafficking, while the others had the most the biggest red flags or indicators of trafficking, and they handed those out after masses. Then they actually collaborated with the parish's book club and helped the group select a few books that addressed trafficking. And then the Esther Ministry, came up with a discussion guide and questions to lead the book club. And finally, they regularly hosted fair trade coffee and donuts after Mass on Sundays, which many of our parishes do. But the nice thing is they made a specific link, an intentional link between fair trade products and trafficking prevention. Here's another really great example at St. Francis of Assisi in Triangle, Virginia. And they use a lot of community prayer, which, as you know more than I do, is so powerful. And I really like a quote from Bishop Joe Vasquez from Austin, because it really shows the power of when we come together to pray. He says, through prayer, we're growing in solidarity with those that have suffered this affront. And we're also demonstrating to survivors that they are not alone. And I think that's so beautiful. So what St. Francis of Assisi Parish did was hold a special Mass where the homilies and the reading and the prayers of the faithful were dedicated to survivors. And then they created these strands of rope and made them bracelets. And attached to the bracelet was a card, a simple card. And on one side of the card was a scripture that comes from Isaiah 58:6-8. And it is, I'm just going to read it because it's quite powerful. Is this not the kind of fasting I have chosen, to loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke, to set the oppressed free and break every yoke? And on the other side of the card, they had the 24-hour national human trafficking hotline with tips of when to use it. And so, this was trying to accomplish two things, right? Getting everybody together in prayer to show solidarity with victims, and also to have a few first basic tips on how to identify trafficking and where to go to report it. Now we're going to move on to Orlando, the Diocese of Orlando, who uses art to take awareness raising to a new level. So I really love this canvas that they've created. It has two huge eyes and the statement, "I will not look away," human trafficking, signs of human trafficking all around us. So after they give a workshop on human trafficking at one of many of their parishes, they will ask the attendees to sign that canvas with their name, which translates into a commitment to be the eyes and ears of law enforcement. And this simply translates into programming that Polaris National Human Trafficking Hotline in their phone, and the commitment to report any suspicious behavior as their first step towards becoming involved in the eradication of this crime. Then we're going to go from the East Coast back to the West Coast, Seal Beach, California, St. Anne's. They like to reinforce their parishioners' understanding of human trafficking by inviting them to teach others at local community events. And so Seal Beach has, I think it's twice a year, 3 times a year, a health expo. And the St. Anne Catholic Church goes to that. They man a booth, and they offer people fact sheets and educational materials, including materials that are from the Department of Homeland Security's anti-trafficking movement called the Blue Campaign. Many of you might have heard of it already, but I recommend it fully to you. Just Google Blue Campaign. They have so many amazing materials that you can download in a second in several languages. So please go there for your first educational materials when you're working with your parish. But to go back to St. Anne Catholic Church, they also pass out the fair trade candy and make that intentional connection with prevention of trafficking. And they wear as a symbol blue, and they have pins that have hearts on them. And that gives them another way to explain to those that pass by their booth that the hearts and the color blue are both international symbols of solidarity around the world towards survivors. So now we're going to go to that second prong of 3 prongs, which is engagement, moving from awareness to action. You know, we've spoken about how this awareness raising can really create more of an eagerness and yearning to be involved and to act. And this enthusiasm can really be leveraged. We can show parishioners that despite being a complex issue, as we mentioned, there's something that we can do, and there's safe and responsible ways to do it. And they will have an impact. Of course, the first thing is we can't be the ones to rescue. We always find, not just in the Catholic Church, not at all, but everywhere, that there's good Samaritans that want to go out there in the streets and rescue, but that's not good for us, and it's not good for the victims. It puts them in danger. So although it might sound like common sense, it's something that you have to say from the very beginning. This is the law enforcement and the social service professionals' job. Our job can be to assist through prevention, protection, and partnership. And this can be powerful, and it's just as important. So another step to remember is to avoid duplication and to help with needs and requests from organizations that are already serving survivors, that are already working on prevention issues, and that might be already working on advocacy to push forward anti-trafficking legislation. And these entities can be faith-based, nonprofit, government. And the idea is to get to know them, find out what they do, and then learn what they need and how you can be a help. And also in these entities, I can't forget to mention to you or emphasize enough that most every city or county has either a human trafficking task force or a human trafficking coalition that are made up of law enforcement, local government agencies, those social service providers, and many of them also invite parishes or churches, a representative from one of them, to be involved. So you can go to them, you can ask if you can attend a meeting, and you can find out what's happening in the area and where the gaps are, how you as your parish or community can be of help. So in terms of getting started with engagement, I wanted to go back once more to this church in St. Francis of Assisi. Excuse me, the parish is called St. Francis of Assisi, but it's in Triangle, Virginia. And we have really thought they've done great work, because they not only are great at building relationship with local and state organizations, but they've looked at their parishioners that have wanted to be involved. They've found out what their professions are, what their experiences and talents, and they've used that. For example, the first connections they made was with parishioners who studied nursing or public health. Then they contacted a nonprofit organization known as Action and Community Service, and these parishioners that were nurses or were involved in public health were trained to answer the sexual assault hotline, where several of the callers had been subjected to commercial sex exploitation. The second effort was with the Prince William County Human Trafficking Task Force. I just mentioned how important those task forces is. This task force had a subcommittee, an outreach subcommittee. So parishioners that were educators or that liked to train and educate became involved with this subcommittee and started going to schools and parent meetings and maybe community group meetings to talk about the scope and prevalence in the area, to just spread the word about trafficking and what it looks like. Finally, there were several parishioners that were interested in advocacy and policy. So they called the Virginia Catholic Conference and found out a way that they could help to push legislation or lobby legislation with local delegates that protects victims. And for example, a few years ago, they were working on passing the Safe Harbor Act And this ensures that minors that are subjected to sex trafficking are treated as victims and rather than being prosecuted as prostitutes for the crime of prostitution. Here, this is a favorite of mine. It's called the Build a Backpack for Victims. And this is another project by the Diocese of Orlando. The Diocese of Orlando actually has their own human trafficking task force. And they introduced this to their local parishes because it's a great way for local parishes to get involved and feel like they're helping victims. So many police and social service agencies, professionals, when they first encounter victims, especially on a raid, all the victim has on their back is just clothes. They have nothing else. So these backpacks provide them with their basic personal needs. As you can see, it's filled with shampoo and deodorant, feminine products, water, a toothbrush, toothpaste. Sometimes it has a gift card for $10 or $15 to get food, a bus pass, you name it. But the individual who introduced us, USCSB, to this project, Deacon Fred Molina, he always points to the fact that each of these backpacks should have a little stuffed animal. You know, it might seem silly because even if these are minors, some of them might be 16 or 17, but it means so much to them because it's something they can hold on to that give them at least a tiny bit of security in their first few hours where they've been released from the trafficking situation. This is I really love this project too. It's called the SOAP Project, and it's a favorite also of St. Rose of Lima's Parish in New Jersey. The SOAP Project is a nonprofit organization, and it was founded by a sex trafficking survivor who was also a Catholic. And this organization's mission is to assist sex trafficking victims by placing the phone number of the National Human Trafficking Hotline on the back of the bar of soaps, which are then distributed to hotels and motels. And Teresa Flores, the founder, her words were the following. And it kind of shows you the motivation that got her to begin this project and this mission. The only time they are alone in the bathroom washing up, that's the only time they are alone. And I thought, what would I see in the motel? I thought it had to be a bar of soap. That's simple. So this project actually has two phases. The first one is fun but simple, so you can also invite your youth group at parishes, and it's just called a label gathering, and it's getting together. You have just hundreds of these little soaps that go to the motels, and you just stick the labels on. It's a labeling party, and then you send these the labeled soaps back to the organization who will be the one to distribute them among the hotels. If you want to take it a step further, you can call SOAP and they will send an instructional kit. And then you can learn how to conduct outreach to hotels and motels in your local area. And you can not only give out the soap, but for interested hotel staff, you can give them information about how to spot possible signs of trafficking within the hotel industry. You can provide posters of missing children and also red flag cards in several languages or the language that's most needed by the establishment. Now we're going to pass to a parish in Charlotte, North Carolina called St. Matthew's. And St. Matthew's obtains handcrafted cards made by survivors of human trafficking. And these survivors are in El Salvador. And they place these cards for sale at the parish gift shop. And all of the proceeds go back to the artisans. And for each card comes with a story and a name that brings awareness to the topic of trafficking. And it also makes it very tangible for people wanting to help, especially in the first stages, because they're knowing that purchasing this simple card, the proceeds will go back to the survivor. And also, it's also important, and you can teach the parishioners that buying these products that are made by survivors allows them to start making income to support themselves, which will help them avoid re-victimization in the future. So this project is also by the same parish in North Carolina. They collect used bras and sends them to a nonprofit organization known as Free the Girls. This is a nonprofit that provides opportunities for survivors to make safe and sustainable income by selling donated bras in the secondhand apparel market. And you think, how can this be something that can provide an income? Well, if you can believe it, 70% of the world actually wears secondhand apparel. And it's very important for these survivors because many of them who are coming from developing countries don't have job skills, don't have the education they need to get ahead, and particularly because they were trafficked in their youth during their primary school years. So again, selling these bras is a great way for these women to begin to make an income. And it also allows them to deal only with female customers, which is important, so they won't be harassed by potential traffickers or pimps and go through everything all over again. What's very interesting is last year, Hanes Brands joined forces, and they are doing a great job at calling for everyone to donate their used bras so it can be sent to Free the Girls. Finally, we're going to go on to sustainability. You know, eradicating human trafficking for our community requires sustained, ongoing efforts from key sectors of society, and we talked about how important the Catholic Church is in this. But how can anti-trafficking activities or ministries become permanent in the diocese or in a parish without the need to invest in large amounts of resources and money? While some dioceses and parishes are able to create independent standalone ministries, for others it just isn't possible, and that's perfectly understandable. So what has worked for the majority is to incorporate the topic in a complementary office or department. So take the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, for example. Their anti-trafficking ministry is within the Office of Justice and Peace. And Archbishop Jose Gomez sees this match as seamless. And I really like why he makes the connection. He says that when any one of God's children is suffering an injustice, he calls the rest of us to love and to compassion, to make things right. So how can we justify defending the dignity of some above others and neglect a subset of his most vulnerable creatures? Now, there are a growing number of parishes and dioceses that are embedding human trafficking in their Respect Life departments. And one example is the Archdiocese of New Orleans and their Respect Life office. And you can see on the list to the left that human trafficking is together with topics such as the unborn, disabilities, end-of-life issues. And the former director of this office, Debbie Shidsky, explains it perfectly. She says that our responsibility as Catholics to protect life should respond to the continuum of an individual's existence on earth, from womb to death. And that sanctity and dignity is not based on innocence, but on our image and the likeness of God. And then who am I kidding? Who we really should be highlighting today is the Human Life and Dignity Department of the Archdiocese of San Francisco, who has done a tremendous job incorporating human trafficking as a really important part of their portfolio. So we're really excited about that. And I know the examples that I just gave were on the level of the archdiocese or diocese, but this is perfectly transferable to the parish level. I mean, parishes have social concerns committees, social justice committees, Respect Life groups, so you can make human trafficking a part of that. Now, we can also talk, when it comes to sustainability, about embedding trafficking messages and themes in your regularly scheduled activities. It doesn't have to be an office or a committee or department. So I wanted to go over 3 great examples. The first one, and we touched on it a little bit, is fair trade. I don't know about you, but I feel that so many parishes sell fair trade coffee to fundraise. My parish in Washington at St. Joseph does it twice a month in order to provide funding to their sister parish in Haiti. So how about giving that activity a value added by showing parishioners how purchasing fair trade helps to curb the demand for products that are produced by forced labor? If you think about it, fair trade ensures that the workers behind these products are given a fair living wage and safe working conditions. And in terms of a family, if they're making a decent wage, they can send their children to school. So you're avoiding children having to work, which is also meaning that we're curbing the demand of child labor. And making this connection may not just help to increase sales, hopefully it will, but it'll also illustrate to parishioners the impact that we can have through responsible consumerism. Where we place our money can make a big difference when it comes to preventing trafficking and curbing demand for cheap products that are cheap and made quickly, because the people behind those products are being exploited. Now, we know a lot of parishes that have ministries addressing homelessness, which is so important. You can expand and put that value added on the ministry by collaborating with organizations that serve homeless youth. There was a study a few years ago by the Loyola University of New Orleans, and they found that nearly 1 in 5, I'm talking about 1 in 5 homeless and runaway youth that are served by the organization Covenant House were subjected to some type of trafficking. So it's a way we can get involved. Finally, foster care. As you know, the children in foster care youth also are highly vulnerable to trafficking. And during Foster Care Month last year, or I think it was a few years ago, the Archdiocese of Los Angeles intentionally highlighted during their campaign that 70% of trafficked youth in the county of Los Angeles come from the foster care system. And they also made sure that people knew that this is even more reason that these children need stable and loving homes and families, foster families, to support, nurture, and protect them from exploitation. And finally, now this falls in the prong of either sustainability or also just engagement. But it's also not always necessary to reinvent the wheel. So you can invite your parish or your community group to join and become a part of programs and events that are happening on a larger scale on an annual basis, because you're going to make it stronger and more powerful. Take the campaigns that are hosted every year by the Coalition of Catholic Organizations Against Human Trafficking, for instance. The coalition, known by its acronym COAT, is made of over 35 organizations, Catholic organizations in this country, that are all working together to end human trafficking. So each year around Lent, the coalition launches a campaign to raise Catholic awareness about forced labor in the fishing industry, which I talked about a little bit earlier. But this year, due to the global pandemic, there's actually a new humanitarian crisis that's emerged, and it's severely impacting all men and women that are working at sea, not just the fishers. And so the coalition, along with Stella Maris, I don't know if you've heard of I don't know if you've heard of Stella Maris, but it is our Catholics ministry, worldwide ministry, to meet the needs for men and women working at sea. So anyways, the coalition and Stella Maris has come together to host a campaign where we're going to urge Catholics to pay witness to the life of the seafarer and leverage their voices to uplift their safety as one of the world's most invisible group of essential workers. Why are they on the front lines? 90% of our products that we consume daily are transported through the ocean. And who's bringing them to the shores? It's the seafarers. So what's happening, just really quick, and why should we be concerned, and why are we calling this a humanitarian crisis? Seafarers' labor rights and mental health are really in jeopardy. And why? So what happens is a seafarer usually has a contract to work on a ship that usually lasts between 4 to 10 months. And this is obviously to protect him from exhaustion and also to let him return to his family to spend time with them until the next contract. Well, in an effort to contain the coronavirus, as many of you already know, many governments are refusing travel into or through their countries. And so that's made it nearly impossible for seafarers to disembark their vessel. They're stuck on their vessel for months on end. This has left over 400,000 seafarers trapped on ships long after their original contract has expired. Many of them are experiencing severe mental health issues, trauma, and we call it the crew change crisis. The fact that they can't leave their ship is also bringing risks of labor exploitation and possible forced labor because they're being compelled to continue work at sea without having a valid contract. So finally, what is this campaign all about? It's going to have 3 pillars: education, prayer, and action. We'd love you to get involved in your parishes. Education is simply spreading the word about how important seafarers are to our lives and why they are an essential part of our supply chain. We want to educate family, friends, and community. The second one is prayer. We talked about the power of prayer. And so we'll be providing you with moving ways to ask God and Mother Mary to care and protect for seafarers and their family. And third, advocacy. We will have an ask, because there's so much power in numbers. And we'll be inviting you to call greater attention to this crisis, and also to make everyone know that seafarers should be designated as essential workers and have priority access to vaccines so they can get off the vessels. So I just want to end with this quote. And before I open it up to questions, thank you for having me. I think this is really powerful and a great way to sum things up. The Catholic, and it is again from Pope Francis, the Catholic Church intends to intervene in every phase of the trafficking of human beings. She wants to protect them from deception and solicitation. She wants to find them and free them when they are transported and reduced to slavery. And she wants to assist them once they are freed. And we can talk about it more during the question and answer, but if you want to get a hold of this, all of this resources, you can go to bricks.org, become a shepherd, or please feel free to write me directly. This is our MRS Shepherd email, but I'm looking at it, and so is my boss every single day. It's mrsshepherd@usccb.org with any questions or materials you're looking for, and I'd be happy to help you. So let me stop the share and see if we have any questions.
We do. We have some Q&A here.
Great.
The first one says, what is connection of fair trade coffee candy to this issue? What is a connection, I think? Yeah.
Oh, but fair trade?
Yeah, they're asking what is the connection of fair trade coffee candy to this issue?
So it's just the fact that when you have fair trade products, you can be assured that the people that behind the product that are manufacturing the product, or if they're, for example, it's a coffee bean or a cocoa bean, those that are behind the harvesting and the processing, they are being treated with dignity, they're having safe working conditions, and most importantly, they're having a living wage. So you know it's a way to prevent labor exploitation and labor trafficking. So it's like reducing the demand for quick and cheap products that actually at the end can end up being, excuse me, let me back that up. It's curbing the demand for products where workers behind that product are being forced to labor against their will.
The next question is, can you explain your logo symbolism, red, orange, yellow with a cross and bishop's hook?
Oh, are we talking about the shepherd one?
I believe so, yeah.
Oh, that is a very good question, and I should know that. I think just, well, the cross is just really important to us, but if you'd like, I would be happy to find out about the symbols and the colors. It was created before I arrived, and I think that's a great question, and I will find out for you.
The next question is, are there products we should avoid that are associated with human trafficking?
Yes, there are. And I know, we're actually thinking about, because there was actually a webinar earlier today, and someone asked a really good question. It's like, okay, well, how do I know which products are fair trade? And there is a lot of, there's apps out there that you can use. One that's particularly good is called, what is it called? It's created by the Department of Labor. The name will come to me in a second. And what it does is you open up the app and you put the product that you're about to buy, let's say banana, or let's say coffee beans. And it'll, usually when you look at a product, it'll tell you where it comes from. So you can look up the country where your product is coming from, and that'll tell you if the government is having good faith efforts to eradicate human trafficking or forced labor or not. And when they have terrible records about how they're trying to handle human trafficking, then you want to avoid that product in that country.
That's the last question. So thank you, Lisa, so much for tonight's presentation. And this has been recorded, so everybody's welcome to watch it again and use this presentation to maybe start something in your parishes.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, and everybody have a great night.